Well, hi everyone. How are you doing? Welcome back to Have I Told You the One About? And tonight is poetry night. So, not stories, but stories, and everything is a prompt for a story. So, um, I'm just going to be real and tell you I had a really lovely day, and then I found out through social media that an old friend, not a close friend, but somebody I really, really admired, who was the partner of the sweetest person on the planet. They were just golden, are and were. My friend died, Donnie. So I was going to be very prepared for tonight, and I'm not as prepared. And I can see the tears in my face. So I'm throwing poems together that I think actually worked out quite nice, and we're just going to have a night. And I think it's going to be beautiful because the world is real. So I thought I would do tonight. I wanted to do poetry, and I thought I would do a little theme, which is not really much of a theme, but it's a loose theme. So I've picked 4 poems by poets that I really like and poems that inspired me. And I'm going to read a poem that is somebody else's, and then I'm going to read a poem that is like my response to that work, or that work that I tried to do in the manner of them, sort of an honoring poem. And by the magic of the universe, the first poem is by, I'm picking a Bronwyn Wallace poem. She's a Canadian poet. She was sort of like my poetry mother in a way. Like when I was first discovering poetry, I found her work, and she lived an hour and a half up the road from me, and or had lived an hour and a half up the road from me, and she died. She died of cancer. So anyways, I loved her work. I've always been influenced by her work, and I see it everywhere in the things that I do. And here was this woman who I admired so much, who lived just up the street and who passed away. And this is a really gorgeous poem, and it's for Donnie. Joseph McLeod Daffodils. And Bronwyn wrote this for Isabel Huggin. I'm planning perennials this year, you tell me, because I'm scared, and it's the only way I know to tell myself I'm going to be here years from now, watching them come up. Maybe it's a phase we're going through, since I'm at it too, lily of the valley under the buck hedge, thinking when Jeremy is old enough to drive, I'll have to divide these, put some under the cedars there. By the time he leaves home, they'll be thick as grass. And at the same time saying, God, we're parodies of ourselves, 60s children, still counting on flowers for Christ's sake to get us through. Knowing you'll see it that way too, your snort of laughter, the index of my love, and the wisdom of George Eliot's observation that a difference of taste in jokes is a great strain on the affections. Another thing we share, our delight in quotations like that. Exactly what you'd expect from girls who grew up wearing glasses into women who read everything. Your bathroom, so much like mine, a huge bin of books by the toilet and on the shelves, all the bottles turned label side out. The contents of somebody's bathroom, Diane Arbus said, is like reading their biography. This doesn't help much, does it? You're laughing, but your hands stay clenched in your lap, still forcing the tight, dumb bulbs into the ground, as if you could force your life to a pattern as serene as theirs, a calm that flourishes in darkness to the pull of the sun. Still, I keep on talking. It's the only wisdom that I've got. How about this one? You know those big yellow daffodils? They're called Joseph McLeods. Well, the way they got their name was that the man who developed them always kept a radio on in the greenhouse. And the day the first one bloomed in 1942 was the day he got the news of the Allied victory against Rommel at El Alamein. And the announcer who read the news was Joseph McLeod, which shows a sense of history I can appreciate. No El Alamein Glorias or Allied victory blooms for this guy, you can be sure. It's like the story my mother always tells about joining the crowds on VE Day, swollen with me, but dancing all night, thinking, now she can be born any time. What I love is how these stories try to explain the fit of things, though I can see your moods for something more sinister. Like the reason Diane Arbus gave for photographing freaks, maybe. Aristocrats, she called them. They've already passed their test in life. Being born with their trauma, that is, while the rest of us must sit around dreading it. Meaning you and me, normal. Look at us, practically wizened with worry, hunched over coffee cups, whispering of cancer and divorce, something happening to one of the kids, our lives spread out between us like those articles you read about midlife crisis or identity anxiety, conflict of role expectations in modern marriages. The kind that tell you you can fix all that with less red meat and more exercise. Something you decide about. Though what it all comes down to every time is making do. You can call it a choice if you want, but that doesn't change what we learn to rely on. The smaller stratagems. Whatever works. The socks and their neat balls tucked on the right side of the drawer. The iris coming up each summer in the south bed. Be sincere and don't fuss. Noble deeds and hot baths are the best cures for depression. It's what I love in you, Isabel. How you can stand here saying, brave and kind. I want to get through this being brave and kind. Squaring your shoulders like a heroine in those movies our mothers watched, where people knew their problems didn't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world, and let it go at that. Fitting themselves to the shape a life makes for itself without meaning to. I love your grin from the end of my sidewalk as you head for home, posed like a photograph. Perfectly ordinary woman on suburban street. A secret about a secret, Arbus called this kind. The more it tells you, the less you know. That is Bronwyn Wallace, Joseph McLeod Daffodils. Man, I have loved her for a long time. She does this really beautiful things in her lines where she tells you half of a thing. The first half of the line has one meaning. And when you get to the second half, the next line, the second half of the thought, there's a whole other meaning. And the meaning of that sentence is divided between the tension between what the first thing means and what the second thing means. Her lines add a third meaning. It isn't about what this is or what that is. It's about what the two of them are and the tension within them, the tension between those two thoughts, how you start a thought and how you end it, has a new thought in the middle of that. It's really, really beautiful. I don't pretend to be able to do that all the time, but this is one of my favorite poems that I would not have written if it wasn't for Bronwyn Wallace. It's called The Summer. That no one mentioned when I came to meet you for a lake swim the afternoon after your wedding. Don't mind the deer carcass at the corner of our driveway. Don't mind the black cavern in its cheek, nor the small, too white stalactite bone of its jaw. That I was grieving the mother of a friend who died after a slow death in hospice, and the teenage daughter of others. She died in a log cabin fire that same weekend. That we celebrate our lives in contrast to these misfortunes, for these misfortunes are not ours. That we love our friends, and that this love is hard to describe, for it is slippery as lake water, always steady and always changing. It tells us nothing of our future. That we have a future. That your wedding is our promise as well. That we ate spiced rabbit for dinner and talked about our friend who collapsed in the shower last summer. That death is all around us. That the more people you love, the more you have to bury. That I'd been wondering if I should kiss a particular boy, and if that counted as an old pattern I should break. Success being the closest difference between romance and a habit I can't undo. That a grasshopper snapped its wings over the yard. That there were hot dogs and apple pie. That we cried more during the ceremony than at the side of the road. That is how it should be if we're lucky and learn well to love what's coming and what's here. That your cousin instructed us to return from the lake with something interesting, and we didn't think of it again once the frisbee arrived. That so many of us write poems and worry for our health and well-being, and none thought to mention the deer in advance. That its leggy corpse was rock, more solid than resting, so outwardly still in the face of flies and what else. That I chose when applying sunscreen to his broad-shouldered back to regard my hand as a third party so it would not betray me. That death, when it came for her mother, was a blessing for my dutiful friend. That deer were everywhere those summer nights, a portend for I knew not what, one hoof stepping off the curb. I'm kind of amazed how many echoes there are between those two poems. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, so that's Bronwyn Wallace, the great Kingston, Ontario, Canadian, beautiful short story writer and poet. Next, this is, I don't know this poet very well, but this is a collection. My friend sends out this little collection of her favorite poems for the year, and I really love this poem. It's Keetje Kuipers, who I believe is, oh God, I don't know. I misremember things all the time. I'm terrible with names. Anyways, I've read a bunch of their poems, and this one I really love. A beautiful night for the rodeo. It was a beautiful night for the rodeo. Rain all day and then a sheen of evening sun. I went to the grocery store, bought someone else's bread, someone else's milk. I walked someone else's heart through the empty aisles, checking items off someone else's list. Back home, I let someone else's dog out into the yard and poured someone else a drink. That's when someone else started crying. I shook her by the shoulders, said, "Don't lose it." But someone else wouldn't listen. In the dirt ring across town, men lined up for all the hairy beasts that would throw them to the ground. That's how it'd look in tomorrow's papers. They'd stand up smiling, toss their hats in the air, walk bow-legged through the mud. Children falling off sheep, women vaulting from steers. They dirty their boots, stain their chaps, drag their long golden ropes through the horse shit. I told someone else, she could be that brave, that I'd show her how. So I really loved all that rhetorical device, that it moved through the someone else. And I thought, okay, well, and many times when I read poems, I think, okay, this is their version. So what's my version? What's my version of this someone else, of this rhetorical device? And so I wrote this poem in response to it. It's called A Little Story of Dissociation. Concrete gives up its heat as dogs of the neighborhood rest in the long grass behind the hall. This evening offers the kind of breeze after a summer wedding a family needs to best enjoy the night, dancing. Their neighbors in light linen dresses who call across the street to join them simply wave, pretending to have not heard, return home, sprawl on the couch, log into a computer, use someone's password, chat in a chat room with someone else's name to arrange a stranger's rendezvous. In the safety of someone's home, someone leaves the front door unlocked, undresses, crawls into someone's bed with sheets thrown accidentally on purpose across someone's exposed ass. In the hall up the street, the backs of women and men are slick with effort, dancing to Motown. The floorboards keep time with the walls. Some other someone here lets himself into someone else's home, slides a tongue in someone's crack, slicks someone up and raw ruts this someone's hole. Someone thinks he can hear through a downstairs window all those shoes hitting the hall floor with a force of joy or determination. An evening is made from thousands of unchoreographed dramas, a party, a mania of heat, dogs and cool breezes, a whole host of someones invited to dance. Ooh, we're having a big night. Oh man, I'm reading you some of my favorite poems. This one is probably my absolute favorite poem, and I read it to my students. I teach it in my class, and I don't know why, because I don't think the poem is all that sad, but I cry every time I read it, and I'm crying already tonight, so I'm gonna try hard not to cry all over the GD screen. This is Pipistrelle. Pipistrelle is another word for a bat. The winged creature, the bat, Pipistrelle, sort of like aubergine and eggplant. And it's by Mark Doty, this gay poet. He's an American poet. He's one of my favorite poets. He's brilliant, and he writes the most beautiful poetry, and he's a queer person. Mark Doty, Pipistrelle. His music, Charles writes, makes us avoidable. I write Emissary of Evening. We're writing poems about last night's bat. Charles has stripped the scene to lyric, while I'm filling in the tale, how, when we emerged from the inn, an unassuming place in the countryside near Horwithy, not far from the Wye, 2 twilight mares in a thorn-hedged field across the road, clotted cream and raw gray wool, vaguely above it all, came a little closer. Though when we approached, they ignored us and went on softly tearing up audible mouthfuls. So we turned in the other direction toward Loft Pool, a mud hole scattered with sticks beneath an ancient conifer's vast trunk. When Charles saw the quick ambassador fret the spaces between boughs with an inky signature too fast to trace, we turned our faces upward, trying to read the deepening blue between black limbs, and he said again, "There he is," though it seemed only one of us could see the fluttering Pipistrelle at a time. You turn your head to where he'd been. No luck, he'd already joined a larger dark. "There he is," Paul said it, then Pippa. Then I caught the fleeting contraption, speeding into a bank of leaves, and heard the high, 2-syllabled piping. But when I said what I'd heard, no one else had noticed it, and Charles said, only some people can hear their frequencies. 50 years old, and I didn't know I could hear the tender cry of a bat. Cry won't do. A diminutive chime somewhere between merriment and weeping. Who could ever say? I, with no music to my name save what I can coax into a line, no sense of pitch, heard the night's own one-sided conversation. What to make of the gift? An oddity like being double-jointed? Or token of some kinship to the little Victorian handbag dashing between the dim bulks of trees? Of course, the next day we begin our poems. Charles considers the Pipistrelle's music navigational, a modest, rational understanding of what I have decided is my personal visitation. Is it because I am an American, I think, the bat came especially to address me, who have the particular gift of hearing him? If he sang to us, but only I heard him, does that mean he sang to me? Or does that mean I am a son of Whitman, while Charles is an heir of Wordsworth, albeit, thankfully, a more concise one? Is this material necessary or helpful to my poem, even though Charles admires my welter of detail, my branching questions? Couldn't I compose a lean, meditative evocation of what threaded over our wondering heads? Or do I need to do what I am doing now and worry my little aerial friend with a freight not precisely his? Does the poem reside in experience or in self-consciousness about experience? Shh, says the evening near the Y. Enough, say the hungry horses. Listen to my poem, says Charles. A word in your ear, says the night. I cry every time for the beauty of that poem. Oh, the beauty of that poem, right? Man, I got halfway through and I thought, if it's the bat that's piping, maybe it's a pipistrelle. Maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. Maybe I could look that shit up. Maybe I could have that thought before I get live on camera. Okay, so that is my favorite poem. And I have a dear friend, Matt Rader, who I say is one of the best Canadian poets alive today. He's bound to win every major prize imaginable. He's a genius poet. And so much like Doty and his friend Charles have a conversation, I wanted to have a conversation in my poem with Matt. And I sort of took a similar approach to the poem as Doty did. And so here's my conversational poem to Matt, which is called A Little Story of the Burden in the World. This afternoon in the dry hills, a group of writers gathered in a stucco bungalow to discuss your new poems. Nancy says something about how the book is infected with names: Hamilton, Gardam Lake, Bloodroot, Moher, Hector, Homer. What gives? I'm thinking back to our conversation the day before, how I build poems that kaleidoscope a narrative, attempt nuances in turns of thought along certain lines. And you build by a pattern of details that, when placed together, outline an inarticulable thing. Imagine buckets of paint thrown towards an invisible giraffe. That. The other day, a few of us writers were joking about how we count things: tables in a room, floor tiles, staccato highway lines, bugs. Not that knowing will make life easier, but counting feels like a talisman for safety, a pebble in the hand fallen from the mountain of all we can't fathom. So it strikes me these names aren't about the poem trying to know something anew, not an insight, because even the shadows of your galloping children on a sunny day are heavy with words. Everything exists before them. Your poems silently illustrate, so that only ignorance makes living possible. Born into history, as their slim shoulders widen, they carry more of this, do we say historical, burden of being alive? Your poems are vandals then, Sharon says, dismantling what pre-exists, robbing the rubble to remake a point, or to build a shelter, maybe. At that moment, her ginger poodle presents a prancing, floppy head, a moistened snout. I scratch its chest devotedly. I want this dog to like me because it too is innocent. With my nails penetrating the tight curls of a doggy beast whose name I have yet to know, I'm considering how just because something begins, that doesn't make it new. If you name a thing, you render it less true. And my last two poems, this is Stephen Dunn, who's one of my other great loves. Stephen Dunn, he writes mysteries, Saratoga Springs mysteries set in Saratoga Springs. But he also writes these great poems, and many of them are they're like little short stories. They're like little La Fontaine allegories. And this one is called Decorum. She wrote, they were making love up against the gymnasium wall. And another young woman in class, serious enough to smile, said, no, that's fucking. They must have been fucking. To which many agreed, pleased to have the proper fit of word with act. But an older woman, a wife, a mother, famous in the class for confusing grace with decorum and carriage, said the F word would distract the reader, sensationalize the poem. Why can't they Why can't what they were doing just as easily be called making love? It was an intelligent complaint, and the class proceeded to debate what's fucking, what's making love, and the importance of context, tact, and bon mot. I leaned toward those who favored fucking. They were funnier and seemed to have more experience with the happy varieties of the subject. But then a young man said, now believing he had permission, what's the difference? You fuck 'em and call it making love. You tell them what they want to hear. The class jeered, and another man said, you're the kind of guy who gives fucking a bad name. And I remembered how fuck gets dirty as it moves reptilian out of certain minds, certain mouths. The young woman whose poem it was, small-boned and small-voiced, she said she had no objection to fucking, but these people were making love. It was her poem, and she herself up against that gymnasium wall, and it felt like love. And the hell with all of us. There was silence. The class turned to me, their teacher, who they hoped could clarify, perhaps ease things. I told them I disliked the word fucking in a poem, but that fucking might be right in this instance, yet I was unsure now. I couldn't decide. A tear formed and moved down the poet's cheek. I said I was sure only of gymnasium. Sure it was the wrong choice, making the act seem too public, more vulgar than she wished. How about boathouse? I said. Isn't that a beautifully restrained poem? This poem all about, how language, fucking or making love. And he says, oh yeah, who cares about the word? It's not the word, it's the context. He's like, you put it in you've got this other word that's the actual problem. And so the problem lies not in this linguistic thing of what they were doing, because they were making love. It lies in the detail that making love in public against the gymnasium isn't as intimate as the boathouse. And that's the thing that's led you off. The specific thing is the thing that was wrong, not the general thing, right? It's this interesting, or it's the wrong specific thing they were arguing about. Context, really. Anyways, it's exciting. I love it. I love the story of Stephen Dunn. He writes all these really beautiful story poems. And this isn't inspired by that particular poem, but it's a poem that suits the spirit of Stephen Dunn because it's a story poem. And it's called I Dream of Escape. And this is actually somebody else's dream. I mentioned this the other day, that I did this collection of poems. I wrote a little group of poems that are verbatim poems mostly. That means I didn't alter the text. I asked friends and family to write me their dreams, and I kept them without their name attached in a file all together and jumbled them up and chose dream descriptions and turned them into poems. So I made line breaks and I did some editing. I cut some things out, and I very rarely altered anything. So they're just other people's dreams that they wrote me, and I edited them down. But it still is a Stephen Dunn inspired poem. It's like Stephen Dunn sourcing the same place that this dream is. I dream of escape. I'm walking down a wide city street, Main below Kingsway. It's twilight, danger in the air. Everybody knows of some recent violence. Outside an auto repair shop with its blue and white storefront, I hear rhythmic clanging. Renegade youthful energy. Uh-oh, this is bad, I think, but keep walking. I transform into a monk in burgundy and gold robes. I think this will protect me, but it doesn't. Men drag me in anyway. It's always men and men stories doing men things. They have seized me because I'm a homo. A number of us sit inside the garage in a quiet line. We too are all men. We're still. The guys I thought mechanics are soldiers. They're wearing desert camouflage like Canadian troops in Afghanistan. The guy talking has a sweet face, strawberry blonde brush cut, creamy skin, rosy cheeks. He informs us they will torture and murder us, then show the videotapes on television. I will myself out of there, somehow. I flee through the city, trying to get beyond their territory. I transform. I am a woman and her husband. We are pretending to be Polish refugees because this will help. As a man, I am wearing a not very good blue suit. Mia's wife is wearing a babushka. Our ruse is working, but we have talked to a group of older men casually sitting in a park without realizing they are powerful. As we are leaving, one of them, chunky, white-haired, says he's from Germany. He's known Poles, and they didn't sound like us. Well, that was a bit of an emotional ride for me. And, it's just good to be who you are in the place you are, where you are. And God knows, I'm sure you're all crying at home too. So let's have a little cry together. Yeah. Poetry night. You're my beautiful people. So you can like this story. You can send me emails. You could send me your own poems. You could send me your favorite poems. You could send me little hellos. You could also send me selfies. I'm going to give you a selfie time. You could also tweet out at Michael B. Smith. Nobody ever tweets, but I say it anyways because someday somebody might. One person tweeted once just to say no one tweets, so here I'm tweeting. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want. You can hit the notification bell, which tells you when I'm going live. Here's your selfie time. Oh, I'm not going to forget about the story. There's your selfie time. And I need to draw my story from the magic story bag. There are three story items in there. I have stories lined up for the weekend. I did a little test run today. It was supposed to be the final one, but anyways, I did a test run. It wasn't great, so I'm working some shit out. What is tomorrow's story? Oh, tomorrow is shorts. So that's film shorts. I'm going to show a few short films. You saw one at the show, but I have some other ones, and I'm going to tell you some stories behind them. So stories and poems. First poems and then films. You know what I mean? I'm getting confused. Short films. It'll be fun. And I really love some of these. And there's some nudity, but I think it's fine to have nudity. Yeah, it's fine to have nudity on this, whatever. Yeah. Nudity. Not my nudity. Don't you worry. Somebody else's nudity. It's a woman's nudity. The most harmless kind. Men's nudity, you're always a little suspect. You're like, really? Did you really need to pull that out? But women, you're like, come on. Whatever. I came out of that. There you go. I love you. I got nothing else. I'm going to give you a kiss, but here. Mwah.